Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin Gran. I am a bookseller at Garcia Street Books, and I'd like to welcome you to the 5th edition of Literary Soundbites, our virtual platform created to connect authors with the local readership here in Santa Fe and beyond. Today, we are so lucky to have Kathryn Wilder join us. Kathryn currently lives in Southern Colorado. She's a graduate of the low-res MFA program at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and her essays have appeared in many publications, including High Desert Journal, River Teeth, Fourth Genre, and High Country News. Today, we'll be talking about her memoir, which will publish on May 18th, titled Desert Chrome, Water, a Woman, and Wild Horses in the West. Thank you for joining us, Kathryn.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Would you like to introduce the book for us?
Well, this is Desert Chrome. That horse on the cover his name is Chrome. And the subtitle, Water, a Woman, and Wild Horses in the West, is what the book is about. It's memoir with some natural history mixed in and a little bit of geology and place, a lot of place stuff. And yeah, it's about mustangs and me in a way. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. And would you like to read us an excerpt from the book just to kind of get us in the place?
Sure. This is kind of middle of the book. I'll just start. I decide to do something conservative. I look at a map, follow the route I've taken. Hawaii and California on the perimeter, Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico, part of the spiral. I am in southwestern Colorado. A Dolores River guide purchased some 20 years before and hastily stashed with the map in my truck says the Dolores changes from a fairly clean river to one of the Southwest's dirtiest after its confluence with Disappointment Creek. When living in Utah before Hawaii, I had watched the Colorado River change color with the inflowing Dolores at the confluence above Dewey Bridge. That color comes from a tributary draining a valley in which I find myself these many years later. Now that is magic. The lives flanking Hawaii suddenly connected, bridged by a river. Map and memories in my lap, I look at the rise of mountains to the west. If the Colorado River is just over there, 130 river miles away, that spine of mountains is La Salle Mountains. The same island mountains I looked upon each morning as I awoke in a Utah valley in that other life. A big yellow wolf dog sprawled across my bed. I'm just on the other side. Driving on up the gravel road, the current dogs panting behind me from enthusiasm, not thirst. I pant too, wanting to stick my head out the window and wag my tail. I don't know how that feels to a dog, but I can feel the wag all through me, a buzz, an energy wanting out. Having a tail would help. My heart thumps instead. We cross some dry creek beds and round a bend. An old log house appears near a barn and panel corrals, and I think, oh, and maybe say it aloud after a sharp intake of breath, the way I did as a kid when I saw a dog I wanted, which was any dog. And my mother would scold me for scaring her, but now only the dogs I have hear me as I covet the ranch house nesting near giant cottonwoods and drive on. Dried grasses and rabbit brush bright with color along the road, cottonwoods just barely yellowing, marking the creek, the backdrop of rimrock and distant mountains shifting and changing with perspective. The valley grows more rugged, arroyos and ridges crisscrossing as the pinyon pine and juniper woodland thickens, maybe indicating a rise in elevation, possibly in precipitation. A couple of miles farther, a blur moves into the middle of my view. It's a movement of color, not gray and muted green like the valley, or the dark green and orange of the autumn mountains, or watery blue like the desert sky, but dark and sharply contrasting light. It steps slowly into my vision, slower still into my brain. Again, I stop the truck, right there in the middle of the road, not looking behind me or caring if the third car of the afternoon evolves in my dust. Without taking my eyes from the black and white movement on the gray hillside, I reach for my field glasses. The dogs clamber to the window, noses a quiver. I turn off the truck, slowly open the door. Standing with elbows braced against the window frame to steady my vision, I bring the binoculars to my eyes. Across the road, on the other side of a barbed wire fence, on the other side of a broad arroyo from me, wild horses. They tell their wildness and their arched necks, lithe bodies, and the way they look askance at me, my truck, the dogs at the window, nostrils wide, testing, not like foobar, afraid, but like deer, wary, prey animals alert to danger. The pinto stallion, black and white and wild, stops and sniffs the air, snorting as he stares across distance at truck, dogs, me. He shakes his head and moves on at a brisk trot over the chalky gray hill, nose up, his tail a banner of color. A bay mare follows with her pinto colt, a long yearling, dark bay but for white streaks on his withers and flank, and two pinto mares follow the first mare and colt. Truck motor ticking, the breeze holding my breath and theirs. I stand in the middle of an empty road, in the middle of a huge, no longer empty valley, in the middle of my life, watching wild horses until even the dust from their hooves on the powdery gray trail disappears.
Thank you, Kathryn. That was great.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that was your first time seeing the mustangs. What happened after that?
Well, I kind of fell in love with a lot of things at one time, which is possible to do. I went, these were wild horses, and there's just something so something body about wild horses. And the valley itself, I just was, all my synopses were firing, and I went home, wherever home was at that moment, and went online. And when I was online, I was trying to find information about those particular wild horses, and I found the cabin that I ended up moving to. I found it online, and it just like one thing after another. I found the cabin. I didn't buy it right away, but I fell in more deeply in love. And in that whole process, I ended up meeting TJ Holmes, who took this fantastic photograph. And I started going out into Spring Creek Basin, which is a Bureau of Land Management, herd management area in Disappointment Valley. I started going out with her, and she introduced me to all these horses, and I started learning their names and the bands and all of that. And I just kept falling more and more deeply in love, and I haven't fallen out yet. So then I got involved in advocacy and PZP, the fertility control vaccine, which is, a whole other story. I mean, it's part of this story, but we don't have to go into all of that right now unless you want to.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Yeah. So keep going.
Sure, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
So, a huge part of the sort of dilemma about wild horses is the numbers. There are many out in the wild. There are many in captivity in short-term and long-term holding facilities. And there are Mustang advocates who are working very hard on using a fertility control vaccine that does not harm the mare or fetus, but prevents the mare from conceiving. So she still comes into estrus, she still gets to get bred, and the stallions are happy, and all of that happens. The social dynamics don't change, but the mare doesn't conceive. So there are fewer foals on the range, fewer animals born means, fewer adults end up having to be removed from the wild and taken to um, these facilities, the holding facilities, and adopted or whatever happens to them. So I got very involved in that, and I'm a firm believer in the use of PZP. And TJ is the person who administers it along with BLM to the herd, our herd in Disappointment Valley, and it's very effective. And to me, it's a long-term solution that helps maintain healthy rangeland and healthy horses. So that's a big part of the book.
Yeah. You mention a lot of nature writers throughout, and you directly quote them. And so I was wondering, would you like to maybe read another excerpt that demonstrates the influence that they have on your work, or just on you as a writer?
On my life.
Yeah, on your life. Yeah.
they've had huge influences on my life. I'll read about a couple that people might know. Brooke Williams and Terry Tempest Williams, who were my neighbors in Castle Valley. When in the other part of the life, that I was just talking about, the other side of the mountains. This is a detritus, detritus, Moab 2000. In a white Chevy pickup bearing the red dirt patina of southeastern Utah mud, Brooke Williams drives his wife Terry and me out of our Utah Valley to the winter quiet town of Moab, where we pluck new neighbor Jeff Foote off the sidewalk out of the blustery wind. He and I get to know each other better as we squish into the Chevy's back seat beside a large box of mail, Terry's daily intake. Dining at one of the few Moab restaurants open in winter, the four of us pass questions around with tortilla chips. And the newcomer, newer in coming to the area than me, and I discover that we were born in the same Berkeley, California hospital. We agree that Berkeley seems a long way off, both in distance and time, and moving becomes a topic of conversation. Foote moved around for a few years, settled in Wyoming for a couple of decades, and is just relocating to Utah. I've only moved 3 times in my life, Terry says. The waitress stops to light a candle before taking our orders, giving me time for a quick calculation, a 15-year per place average. Including changing houses, I've moved over 30 times in my 45 years, I say. Easy math, even for me, an average of every year and a half. They look at me as if I've just grown a beard. I am equally perplexed. I don't know people who lived in the same place for as long as 15 years, except my mother and Ed, my sisters and their husbands, my father and his wife, even Rebecca. The list grows, the 3 people with whom I'm dining, adding to it. Brooke reaches across the table for my unused coaster, turning it over and drawing a rough map as he asks my course. The map grows into a sort of angular spiral at the west, with Hawai'i out there on the side. Why, Terry asks, her jeweled eyes bright in the candlelight. Why did you move all those times? Were you running? Foote asks. Our quesadillas and chili rellenos arrive, and Brooke sets the coaster map aside. I think about the different places I've lived, the U-Hauls and highways and long night drives, the friends I made, what I left behind, about desert air at 2 a.m, cocaine on a tiny mirror, a cat jumping out the car window at a freeway gas station and coming back like a dog when called, about what it feels like to wake up in a new state. I gaze into the dark beyond the big windows and back into their faces. Sometimes I was running. They look at me intently, as if my answer matters. Running from, running to. In 12-step programs, it's called a geographical cure. They like that, but it doesn't answer their questions. I don't have a better one. Moving is just something I've done, like school or marriage or drugs. Maybe I was looking for what, Terry says. I don't know. Maybe I'll know when I find it.
Thank you. That was great. Do you still have that map?
I do.
Cool. That's
I
so
put it in my I don't know if Brooke knew that, but I put it in my pocket and took it home, and I look at it. And it actually helped with the writing of this book, because it gave me sort of a picture of what I've done. So kind of cool.
Oh yeah, that's great. I know with a lot of like when archivists go through, the archives with the works of all the nature writers, those are like the coolest parts. They get so excited about something that was written on a napkin at a restaurant or something like that. So that's so neat.
I'll ask him to sign it when I see him next.
That's great. Um, so that last excerpt was a detritus. You include several of those throughout the book, and they seem to function as a way for you to jump time and kind of like it seems as though you're showing us how memories kind of influence your present moment, or that could be one way that they could be understood, maybe. But did you want to tell us a little bit about why you decided to use that method to get there?
It was kind of by accident. I was looking for a form for for the manuscript, which was first my thesis at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and I just had I just was writing smaller pieces and bigger, more essay type pieces, and I kind of alternated. Every other one was a detritus, and it felt really forced to me. And I'm not linear. I don't do things in a line. I go around. So I didn't know what to do because it wasn't working in the actual book. And I was just sitting down by the creek. So Disappointment Creek runs down below my cabin. And I was sitting down there on a rock by the creek and watching water. We just had a rain, and so the water was coming down gray and silty, and with pine cones and debris and sticks and pine needles in it. And I just was watching, and it curves around the rocks and goes around, and it kind of waves up, waves move up against the bank, and then it recedes, and overall it was receding, and each place it was receding, it left something. It left a memento. It left a pine needle or a pine cone or a twig or anything. And I thought that's kind of what life is like somehow. And so, and I, those detritus help build a person's life. They help. I mean, my life is built on all the stuff I've done before. Some of it I want to go away, but it's still part of the foundation. I don't know if I'm answering the question right, but yeah. So then I played with words because, it's debris, it's trash, it's rubbish, it's, whatever. And I just like the word detritus. And yeah, so that's how that sort of evolved.
Oh yeah. I like that. And I like the point you make in the epilogue. It just comes to this, it all just makes sense all of a sudden, kind of, or
Kind of.
yeah, just kind of.
And
Um,
I also look at the book. There's more detritus in the beginning part, and there's less and less as sort of I evolve from, or the narrator evolves from the mess of the past and becomes more of a better person, perhaps by the end. I don't know.
yeah, that's wonderful. I like that. That's neat. And so you mentioned your time at IAIA. So this might be a nice time to just ask you about your relations, because you have so many places, as you mentioned in the detritus that you read for us. But what is it? Well, could you tell us about your relationship with Santa Fe, the place of Santa Fe?
Well, sure. I when I was I think in 7th and 8th grade, I went to a hippie school in California, in the Bay Area, and like we didn't have to wear shoes to school, and we climbed trees and swung on rope swings, as part of our classes. It was great. I loved it. And we'd started a pen pal exchange with students at what became IAIA, but was at the time, I meant to look this up. I can't quite remember. Was it Santa Fe Indian School, maybe? This was in the 60s. This is a long time ago. And that was my first sort of introduction, long distance, to Santa Fe. And I had a pen pal and we wrote, and the whole class was to go on a trip driving to Santa Fe. And I panicked. I kind of an agoraphobia thing. I just couldn't go. And so I missed out on that. But, years later, I ended up going to school in what evolved into the Institute of American Indian Arts, and which of course is in Santa Fe. And in talking to Joy Harjo, she was a student there when I was doing the pen pal thing. We tried to figure out who the student was that I was writing to, but I have no idea. Anyway, so that's another sort of circle about Santa Fe. And in the middle of that, my mother and Ed, her husband, bought a fixer-upper in Santa Fe, and they spent a lot of time there and rented it out. And I went and visited. I think my first actual physical visitation to Santa Fe, I must have been I was living in Flagstaff, and so I went to visit them there. And so it's just kind of, it's a landmark of the Southwest, right? Santa Fe, everybody knows of Santa Fe. And so, it's just kind of been sort of a touchstone for me to go back there and as my life evolves. Yeah.
Great. Thanks. Well, I think we're about to end it. I wanted to say one more thank you at the end, and then just because there's so much going on in the book and we can't really talk about all of it. I wanted to give a personal thank you for, it's just the sense of humor that runs throughout is just so wonderful, even though there's a lot of heaviness to it. And I think that you capture like the ranching life, especially like this kind of just the humor that goes through it, I think is just something that's extremely enjoyable. And so thank you. And thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for saying that. It's a surprise to me. I don't think of myself as a writer with humor. So I appreciate that. And thank you for inviting me. I appreciate this. Thank you all for listening.